Okay, I think we might be live now. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Can everyone hear me okay? We're back. All right. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm so sorry about the mix up there, but I am a new YouTube streamer, so this is my first rodeo, and it definitely won't be my last. So I have my YouTube channel up now, so please, stick around and you can find more demos, streams, and all kinds of stuff in the future. So thank you all so much for tuning in to my talk. I'm having an awesome time at Lightbox Expo. I hope you all are too. It's been so refreshing to just connect with everyone online and have a good weekend about art and creativity, and it's just been so warm and needed, I think. So my name is Brynn Metheney, and I'm a concept artist for entertainment. I specialize in creature design and character design, monster design, animal design, anything to do with weird-looking creatures for games, film, animation, publishing, all kinds of things. I've worked on a number of different projects, including Dungeons and Dragons, and a bunch of different films that I'll talk about also. The number one thing that I'm always kind of looking for in my creature design is trying to make characters that feel plausible, relatable, and like they have a bit of an evolution behind them. I'm really interested in making stuff that feels like it could work and could exist. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that process. A couple of the projects that I've worked on in the past are Sorry to Bother You, Ghostbusters Afterlife, which will be out next year, so look out for that. It was pushed back a year, but we're still going. And Valerian, Men in Black, and of course, what I'm going to be talking about today, Scoob. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how I approach designing some of the animal characters for the new Scooby Doo feature that was just released this year. This was one of my most favorite projects I've ever worked on. It was just the best. I loved every minute of it. I had a great time, and the team that I got to work with was so talented. I was brought on by, let's start from the beginning. How did I even get on this project? Because it's not really, I guess if any of you know my work, I don't know that many people would be like, yeah, she draws a ton of cartoons. I mean, I did when I was first starting out because cartoons are the best and I love animation so much. I've always wanted to work in it. But I guess my work is a little less cartoony, I suppose. But I was actually found by the director, Tony Curvone, found my work online and reached out to me directly and was like, hey, do you want to work on this project I've got going on? It's called Scoob, and it's this new Scooby Doo movie. And I was thrilled, but also like, what? Okay, that's cool. And I thought I'd be designing like, maybe a background monster or something, like a villain that you might see for like a minute and, that kind of thing. So, sort of a not at all what I thought I was going to be on. And so Tony was like, yeah, we really want you to take a crack at Scooby Doo. So I got to touch this really amazing character and a lot of really amazing characters on this project that I never really thought possible. So I was just floored and really excited. So when I started to design Scooby Doo, I had the amazing opportunity to look at a lot of really cool early days of Scooby Doo's character designs. I don't have a lot of that to share with you here because it's pretty protected, but it was all done by the brilliant Iwao Takamoto. He had such an incredible design sense, weight, and economy to his original Scooby Doo designs. It was just perfect. Like, you look at Scooby Doo and he's so simple yet so effective, and he's got the coolest, just dopiest little face. So really a fantastic character. And it's really hard to kind of tackle a character like this because you really want to do them justice. and you know, please everybody. It's actually a very challenging assignment, is to get an established, well-loved character that's been loved for generations, and then kind of change it a little bit to make it new and appealing for the next audience, but also keep it true to form for, you know, the audience that loved it in the first place. So this is it was definitely a journey with Scooby for sure, because we really wanted to bring something new to the table that hadn't really been seen yet. And Scooby hadn't really been animated as a cartoon in 3D. He'd definitely been live action before, but we hadn't really seen him 3D. I mean, I'm sure maybe he does exist and I just don't know. But cool. So anyway, this is my journey on that. And so Tony bringing me on this project, I was a little bit like, why am I going to be on this project? Because this is crazy. And, you know, what do I have to offer this? Well, Tony was like, you know what? You're really good with animal anatomy and creature design. I need you to give some anatomy to Scooby. And so I was like, all right, I can do it. So I started where everybody starts out, and that's with really messy, scribbly drawings. So these were the very, very first drawings of Scooby Doo. And I was really just interested in capturing some of the essence of Mr. Takamoto's designs by giving him that, you know, big barrel chest and those little crooked ears and his S-shaped tail and his kind of wonky, out of proportion, silly look in the beginning. So I was really just kind of focused on doing a number of these drawings to get going on what Scooby's shapes actually boil down to, right? That's really important in character design. So from there, I jumped into, you know, working on Scooby as a realistic Great Dane, which is actually where Tony told me to go. He was like, all right, so if you could draw me, Scooby, as just a Great Dane, you know, but still with some Scooby flair, what would that look like? And so these were some of the early drawings of that. And I did I took a lot of care in trying to make Scooby feel like himself, again, keeping some of those traits with his crooked ears, the S-shaped tail, the big barrel chest, and those silly paws, but trying to bring back a little bit of that realistic Great Dane-ness, right? With, you know, how dogs have their, like, droopy lips, and they don't really actually have eyebrows, so I was trying to get away with, like, the slightest eyebrow I could, and trying to give him more dog-like proportions and expressions. So we explored Scooby like this for quite a while. And you can tell that I'm really trying to stick to dog anatomy in this. He's got dew claws, all of his paw pads are intact, right? He's actually got like some, you know, muscle going on. He looks a little ripped for Scooby. I think Scooby's actually a little bit of a loaf from all those snacks, of course. But we've got this kind of a Great Dane that's cosplaying as Scooby. So it's a little less, oh, you can actually hear dogs in the background. This is a lecture about dogs. And I've got dogs going on in the backyard. Sorry about that, everyone. But it's actually very appropriate to have dogs barking while I talk about Scooby. So that was what I was messing with these initial designs, was just really trying to keep all of the bones there. And again, like as a creature designer and character designer, I take a lot of seriousness and like, I really try very hard to make sure that my joints are shown. That's probably like the number one thing that I tell my students and anyone that I mentor or anything is like, make sure you know where your joints are, because that's kind of, you know, the biggest thing about animating and rigging is knowing where those are. So I was very adamant about making sure that Scooby had very, you know, angular anatomy going on. So we kept exploring. And one of the coolest things about working on this project was that, you know, going back and forth with Scooby's design alongside with Tony, it was a very collaborative process. And Tony was very interested in designing the character along with me. So I would send a drawing to Tony, and then it would come back with his notes on top of it and little drawings on top of it. And he would always kind of push me toward a more cartoony look. So we were sort of in this like back and forth process together, where he would be like, well, this is what the cartoon would look like. And he'd send it to me and I'd say, okay, well, this is what a Great Dane looks like. So we were always back and forth with that. And of course, working on a Great Dane, you know, I drew Great Danes quite a bit. So I did some anatomy studies of Great Danes to really understand what was going on inside of them. And I absolutely suggest this to every character and creature artist out there. You know, doing an anatomy study like this has a ton of value in really understanding not just like how something is built, but how it moves, where the joints are, you know, where you can start to break the rules. Because taking something like this and applying it to Scooby, you know, it's not so much of a giant jump to get to a cartoon dog from a realistic dog. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? So even if we look at this diagram, you can see that, you know, Scooby's eyes are much bigger in relation to his the rest of his anatomy, and his nose is giant. Like, he's got a huge nose and like big, you know, jowls that kind of hang down over his teeth and that sort of thing. So I've taken this Great Dane study and I've basically just exaggerated it, right? You know, and pushed those shapes to match Mr. Takamoto's designs, where he's got that boxy nose, the big eyes, and of course, eventually the crooked ears and all of that. So a lot of my job on this project was to really figure out how things would work. So because Scooby is kind of this cartoon character where he'll like stand up and suddenly run like a man in the old cartoons, and he suddenly has like people hands and can open doors and do everything, you know, like a velociraptor or a person or something. He's got like this, you know, really weird anatomy that kind of doesn't make any sense because he's a cartoon. He doesn't need it to make sense. But we wanted this to feel a little more grounded and real. And we were actually working with real effects, and they had done Rango prior. So we were kind of in this like Rango-esque world with Scooby, which was a little weird, but it ended up being very different in the end. But it was a really interesting place to explore. So a lot of my job was figuring out also how animal parts would work in this world and how you could anthropomorphize certain things like paws or faces or even posture and stuff like that. So these were some studies that I did of Scooby's hands doing normal people things like grabbing a bottle and pushing a button and giving a thumbs up. Things that would be important for his character to do in the film. So all of these, but again, all of this stems out of just tons of, you know, design or tons of observational drawing of real animals here on Earth. And so we have something that I tell creature designers all the time is to go to the zoo and draw as much as you can. And if you don't have a zoo, that's totally fine too. I've absolutely drawn from videos online or photos online or even out of books, anything and everywhere that you can find a picture of an animal. Draw it as much as you can. And I do a ton of animal drawing. I'll typically visit a zoo or a museum about once or twice a month, and I'll work on my observational drawing. So this is some examples of that, of just some of the observational stuff that I typically do. And again, not just like animals on the surface level, but also inside. I'm always thinking about what the internal structure of animals is so I can better inform the designs that I'm breaking or imagining or, you know, making. And so these are some examples of that. This is from the Natural History Museum, and I absolutely recommend going to a museum to do animal drawing because, you know, especially if you struggle with capturing live animals, all of these animals are usually standing still because they're dead or, you know, a fake one or reconstruction or something. So it's a great place to do some of that drawing. But all of this knowledge kind of condenses down into being able to explore those forms with confidence. So, you know, because I've drawn this Garanuk a million times at the zoo, I can absolutely, you know, translate that into something that's more exaggerated or different. And, you know, animals provide a ton of really great expressions and postures and poses, and they're always entertaining and they're never boring and they'll always surprise you. So I really recommend that if you're into character or creature stuff, go draw some animals. Anyway, that's my PSA about animal drawing. Back to Scooby. But yeah, so taking the Great Dane and translating that into Scooby was a pretty interesting exploration. So you can absolutely see between these two dogs very much like how very different they are. You know, in the beginning, Scooby looks really realistic, and you kind of think like, wow, that's just a Great Dane that has Scooby's spots. But then when you look at Scooby next to an actual Great Dane, you really begin to see like how different they actually are. And also where Takamoto took some really awesome liberties and kind of deconstructed the Great Dane into what it wasn't supposed to be. It's said that he thought about Scooby in that sense, that it was supposed to be a Great Dane that was not a show dog. It was never, Scooby was never meant to be like, you know, the perfect example of a Great Dane. He was everything that a Great Dane like wasn't supposed to be. But of course, that's what made him special and awesome, because we all love Scooby, and he's beautiful in our eyes. So I worked on Scooby's face quite a bit in this project also, trying to think about how those proportions would work, and really making sure that his face could read, again, as a real dog. If a real dog were to like suddenly start talking, what would that look like? But also it's sort of in between real and cartoon. Of course, all of Scooby's vowels start with R, because that's how he speaks. And but in this drawing here, I was exploring a lot of like how his muzzle would move around and what teeth you would see. And of course, I'm referencing that from, you know, even my own dogs and like what they look like when they bark or when they yawn or when they cough or whatever they're doing with their mouths all the time. You can apply that to your characters to make them feel a little more realistic if needed. And that's what this project needed. And of course, going back to working with Tony, he has an amazing knowledge of the character himself, having worked with Scooby for a long time. And so as I worked back and forth with him on Scooby's face, we got to this really kind of great middle area where Scooby had the like realisticness of a Great Dane with like all of his teeth intact. He had a pretty accurate dog nose. His ears felt like they could, you know, maybe work. And, you know, his paws felt a little more dog-like. He had dew claws intact. The dew claw is, in case anybody does not know, the dew claw is this tiny thumb-like structure on the side of the paw that aids with, you know, balance and gripping and all kinds of stuff. You see it a lot in predators like big cats, and dogs have them too. They don't really use them for gripping as much, but they use them for other things, and in this rendition, Scooby had them. So again, this was where we ended up with Scooby when I was finishing up with this character. He was an absolute joy to work on. But again, I tried to infuse all of, you know, tried very hard, because, I mean, you can't touch Takamoto. He did such an incredible job. But you know, all of the proportions and stuff that he was working with, I really tried to infuse into this character. But I also tried to infuse a little bit of myself into it, which is always very humbling to do, especially on an established character. But you can see that even in the posing that I'm choosing to present this character in was really important, working on these old Hanna-Barbera cartoons, because they're so iconic, and a lot of their poses are reused in animations and in scenes and stuff, and so they all kind of have this like signature look, not just in their design, but also how they're positioned. And so you can really see that it's actually kind of looking more like Scooby now, which is pretty cool. Of course, in the end, I had to give them an anatomy diagram because I love doing that. And I mean, Tony brought me onto this project because I'm an animal expert, but he also never asked me for this. But when I turned it in, they were really excited to have it. And I ended up doing it for pretty much every character I worked on, just so that way the animators and riggers would have it available for them, because it would help them to animate and rig the character. So this was where I left Scooby. And then, of course, in the end, Scooby ended up looking even more like himself. This is what Scooby looks like in the movie. He's super fun and lovable, and the same, you know, beautiful Great Dane that we all grew up with and love. And I think that he turned out just awesome. And what I love about it, too, is I can see, like, tiny hints here and there of some of my influence, particularly in, like, the way his knees bend and how his legs are shaped. There's a lot of, you know, weight in the paws and all that. And I mean, I touched him for, you know, a good month or two, and then it was handed off to just the whole team of incredible, talented artists that really brought him to this level of just perfection. So I really think he turned out quite perfect. So that was my journey on Scooby and how he came to light. So a lot about dogs, but also, you know, a lot about Scooby. But there were other animals that I got to touch, because Hanna-Barbera is full of animal characters, and they were all a ton of fun to look at. And one of those characters was Jabberjaw. And this was actually my, I think my mom told me that this was her favorite cartoon growing up. But so many, all of my parents, my father-in-law, everybody I know was like, oh my God, I love Jabberjaw. Jabberjaw is a definite classic. He's like a giant shark that decided to walk. He plays the drums for the Neptunes, and he sounds like Curly from Three Stooges. So he's a really fun, dynamic, crazy character from the universe. And so Tony was like, let's take a stab at Jabberjaw. So I did, and it was a little terrifying in the beginning. And I really, again, tried to stick to a kind of a more realistic approach when it came to like shark world. And fish characters are tricky because fish don't really emote. Like they're not like smiling out there. I mean, they might be excited and happy. And I'm sure that they feel like a lot of anguish and stuff, but they never really like express that in a way that we understand, at least that humans understand, because we do everything with our face, and fish don't do that. So when you have a character that needs to kind of act in a human way with its face, and it's a fish, it can be pretty challenging, which I'm sure anybody who worked on Finding Nemo and all those movies would know. But Jabberjaw was kind of a weird character. So in the beginning, I actually placed him on his pelvic fins as a leg, because pelvic fins are kind of where our back legs came from. And, the tree of evolution, there was this, moment in time when, the pelvic fin was this like, okay, yeah, that's going to work out for legs. And that's sort of where the basis, or at least the blueprint of that came from. So it kind of made sense to put Jabberjaw on something that resembled a leg on fish anatomy. So that's where I headed first. It didn't really feel like Jabberjaw, because Jabberjaw's silhouette is like a giant torpedo that's standing on two fins. So this sort of missed the mark at first. So I went toward, what if he just stood on his fins and was just like a big floppy great white shark, and was this kind of, giant character. Of course, he's like twisting his body around because shark fins, are more vertical placed instead of horizontally placed like a whale. So he's kind of doing this like weird back twist all the time, technically. But again, he's a cartoon, it doesn't matter. So this was some of the early scribbles of that. Again, moving into Jabberjaw's face, we wanted him to feel like a shark, but that's a little challenging when Jabberjaw, the cartoon, has forward-facing eyes like a person, and sharks in nature have eyes on the sides of their heads, so it can be a little tough to make those two things, marry each other well. But here we are trying. So this is where we ended up with Jabberjaw for a little bit. He was kind of a big brute and was almost there. We were pretty happy with it, but then it just kind of wasn't working out when we started to like stand him up and walk him around, especially with the pectoral fins. They seemed a little bizarre and weird and kind of distracting. And so we decided to move on to something that felt a little different. But you can see that even, in this drawing, as maybe as creepy as it is, I'm always trying to find that point back to the actual animal. So I'm thinking about like, how many gills does the great white shark have? What are the fins actually shaped like? What are the proportions of the body? Sure, I can like, mess up the teeth and the eyes a bit, but like he has these, nostrils towards the front of his face, and he's got this, large fin, and there's a big muscle mass next to his fin for high-powered swimming in the open ocean. There's all these like signifiers that kind of tell you he's a great white shark. And so that's what I was concerned with. But then, of course, I have this one drawing that I kept from Tony. I wish I would have kept all the drawings he did over my work because they were great. But Tony was like, hey, what if we just kind of like streamlined it and like, maybe enlarged the eye and made things a little simpler. So this was the typical kind of stuff that I got back, which was line drawings over what I was doing to try to push the character in different ways. So in the end, we ended up streamlining Jabberjaw's shape, maybe kind of thinned him out a bit and didn't have his like giant boulder on the end of his tail. Because again, when we look at Jabberjaw as a character, and here he is next to Scooby, oddly enough, he's like just a giant torpedo, and he's got like this huge nose, and he's a big shape. So we weren't actually really happy with this stage just yet. So we kind of went back to square one and started over with Jabberjaw to try to take him back to what he actually looks like a little more by giving him eyes very much on the top of his head, where we've got kind of a person face now. But again, I'm always like trying to be the referee here, where I'm like, wait, we still have to include this many gills, and I can still include, the dorsal fin is like an actual fin. It's not just going to be this like weird triangle shape on the back. And, you know, the pectoral fins are going to feel like they actually attach to the body. And they're, you know, I really want this thing to work like an animal also. So more exploration. Again, Jabberjaw took a lot of weird forms, and I was always moving around on him. This got a little closer, but then we had these like weird, dark, soulless eyes for a little while. And because we were trying to push him back into, you know, shark world, and it just really wasn't reading. It was still cute, but I don't know, it just wasn't Jabberjaw at all. So we took another stab, and we felt like we found something that kind of worked, because it sort of captured the like curly aspect from like the Three Stooges a little bit, where he had this sort of like fun, innocent looking personality that started to shine through in this character. But he's also like a massive predator. And that's kind of the funny thing about Jabberjaw, is that he's this actually like really kind, sweet soul in the cartoons, but he's a shark. So it's like really weird. It's kind of funny, you know, conundrum that he's in. So these were some character studies of him doing things that Jabberjaw might do in his day-to-day, play the drums, do some self-care with some champagne in a bath, underwater with candles, because that works. Giving a birthday party to a fish, you know, these kinds of things to sort of help describe the character a little bit, all while still trying to keep some of that weight. Because you can tell that even in like the tail with him sitting on the bathtub, I'm really thinking about like what would happen to a tail, you know, if you put a great white shark in a bathtub and like had all that muscle mass kind of like spilling out over top of it. So again, coming from my fascination and obsession with animals all the time. So this was actually where we ended up with Jabberjaw, and where he stayed until he was cut from the film. So he's not in the film, unfortunately. He is mentioned at the end. So if you've seen the movie, there are a few team members that are added to Scooby Doo's team at the end of the movie, and it's Jabberjaw is one of them. And so you can see that he's very simplified in his form, but again, still trying to keep some of those things intact, like where the pectoral fins are placed, the dorsal fins along the back. We've reduced the number of gills now, but they're almost there. And you know, of course, that tail fin, trying to keep some of the muscle mass attached to it as much as they'll give me. And then, you know, Jabberjaw's anatomy diagram was kind of interesting, because he did have, you know, a spine that would kind of twist around to make his feet work, which was terrible to think about, but it was a really fun and interesting exploration. And of course, you know, his jaws and his weird musculature in the head there are both present as well. So Jabberjaw was a ton of fun to explore, a really good example of collaboration, and I think, you know, trying to find the essence of a character more so than the look. Because if you look at this version of Jabberjaw compared to the actual version of Jabberjaw, they're actually pretty different. I mean, very different. But I think what works about this version of Jabberjaw is that it feels like him, and that it has some of this, like, you know, lovable sort of like just sweet, kind-hearted spirit that he tends to embody in his character. So a pretty interesting exercise in exploration and design. So the next character I'll talk about is another beloved Hanna-Barbera character that was also cut from the film, but I was really excited to work on, was Grape Ape. Now, Grape Ape is kind of a mystery, because we weren't actually sure what kind of ape Grape Ape is. So in the beginning, you know, Tony was sort of like, so we think he's like a chimp gorilla hybrid. You know, he's just kind of like what people think of when we think of an ape. It's like, yeah, it's shorthand for a gorilla or a chimp. And so that's kind of where you get Grape Ape. So in the very beginning, we actually explored Grape Ape as with more chimp proportions. And, you know, chimps are shaped, they're pretty short in stature. They've got very long arms and big ears. They almost look childlike in like their proportions, like if you were to compare them to a gorilla or something larger. So he had a very chimp-like build in the beginning. Small waist, broad shoulders. This was Grape Ape for a minute. From here, we took him to kind of a different area, and it was sort of, I had suggested to Tony that he was more of like a pear-shaped bonobo. So if you've ever seen a bonobo before, they're kind of like an elongated chimp, right? They're part of the chimp family, and they're kind of their own thing, but they are very long in their look, and so they have a much more balanced kind of set of proportions. Their legs are a little longer than this, though, so it's sort of like we took Grape Ape as a chimp and kind of stretched him out a bit in terms of his proportions. So he became a little more true to his original design, particularly in a lot of the posing that we started putting him in to make sure that he was reading as that classic Hanna-Barbera. Important things about designing for this film was really trying to make sure that we captured some of the iconic poses that these characters were in throughout their character sheets and in film stills, because so much of Hanna-Barbera animation is, reused and stuff for budget. So, a lot of like Scooby's run cycles are kind of, reused, or Grape Ape's doing like a pose, or Jabberjaw doing a thing. It's typically reused, so we really tried to keep some of these poses iconic. So this is where I got to with Grape Ape, where Tony was feeling really good about it, and the team was excited about his proportions. So we explored there for a little bit, and these were some other studies for that. The big thing about Grape Ape that I really tried to do was to really make sure that his hands and feet were being treated in a way that felt authentic to the animal. In the original design of Grape Ape, he's got some, variation in his feet and hands, but for the most part, they're pretty much just people hands and people hands for feet also, which is kind of terrifying. But I really tried to pull more proportionally, gorilla or chimp-like proportions in those feet, because gorilla and chimp feet are built for climbing and for gripping onto things. They're actually highly specialized and very dexterous. And so you can see in Grape Ape's foot, particularly in this drawing, just how far away the thumb, quote unquote, the thumb is from where like the index finger would be, right? And that's really good for making sure that he can wrap that foot around tree branches or whatever he needs to. Same with the hands of Grape Ape. We really wanted them to feel long and more ape-like, so they had a more elongated proportion there. They weren't just like man hands on an ape. It was a little weird. So Grape Ape happened pretty fast, actually, compared to some of the other characters, especially Jabberjaw. I felt like Jabberjaw kind of was always in the background, taking forever, but Grape Ape took shape pretty quick. And these were some of the expression sheets that I got to do for Grape Ape when he started to finalize. And you can see that I've changed his ear proportions back too to kind of match a chimp. So he's a little bit of a chimp in the face, but then he's got more of like a bonobo gorilla body. Again, a mystery ape, and sort of a mix of all of them to kind of be this like really special character that he is. But the expression sheets were one of my favorite parts about this project, because I could really show some animal behavior in some of them. I mean, I know that everyone, if you've ever seen a chimp get angry or smile or maybe stick its tongue out or something like that, you've definitely seen some of these traits in these expressions before. So I'm not just thinking about human expression in these, I'm also thinking about how animals express themselves and what they might use to convey emotion or fear or happiness, surprise, that kind of thing, to try to make it feel like, again, he's a character, he's a cartoon, but he's still an ape, and he has all of these ape-like traits that we can pull from that are just as good or funny and great that people love from real animals, of course. So this was Grape Ape, and of course he also got an anatomy sheet because everybody did. Because I just got really obsessive over this and it was a ton of fun. But I was, again, very interested in making sure that his hands and feet felt authentic to the animal and that his anatomy reflected that also. So you can see that even though his anatomy might feel very human to those of us who know human anatomy, there's a lot of differences happening. His rib cage is very wide. His pectoral muscles are very small and underdeveloped. In the anatomical view, his shoulders are very highly developed, right? And we see this a lot in gorillas and chimps because they're primarily moving around on 4 limbs, so they don't really have pectoral muscles that are overdeveloped like ours, where they hold their arms out to the side all the time. They're really kind of pulling them in front of themselves and walking around on all 4s quite a bit. So they've got a more a different sort of structure. So for those of us who might be interested in making creatures or characters that are based on ape anatomy, do make sure you look beyond humans, because it's a whole different set of proportions. All the systems are the same, and that's one thing I'll add to this, is that when you talk about vertebrate anatomy, particular animals with spines and all that, everything is exactly the same. All of the bones and muscles are pretty much all there. They're just arranged in different ways and have different proportions. So but it's very important to take note of those proportions, especially when we're dealing with apes and monkeys, because we might think immediately like, oh yeah, they're just like, very close to people, so I can just use people and, human anatomy, and it's fine. But you really can't, because it's actually quite different when you really start to look at it. So that was Grape Ape. He actually did sort of take some other shapes towards the end. He got a little bit of a revision a couple times here and there when we tried to push him more into like prehistoric ape territory, and even different proportions and all that. But this was basically where Grape Ape ended up when I was finished, and when he was taken from me. So it was a really, really great run. But he was also cut from the film, so it was pretty much over for him. Unfortunately, because I really would have loved to see him animated. I'm sure it would have been great. So the last character that I'll cover a little bit about is Muttley. Muttley is, I think, my favorite Hanna-Barbera character, just because, or one of them. I think my other favorite might be Snagglepuss. But I love Muttley. He's so fun and mischievous and cute. He's kind of a dog. So when we started this, we all were like, yeah, Muttley's a dog. And then we were kind of like, he is a dog, right? Like, he's totally a dog. But we are he's a dog. So we kind of went back and forth and decided he's a dog. And I'm pretty sure it says he's a dog somewhere in the canon. But he kind of has like a weird bear vibe, and he walks around on 2 legs all the time. So he's a little different in terms of like Hanna-Barbera taxonomy from Scooby. Whereas like Scooby's more dog-like, and Muttley's different. He's got a different vibe going on. But nevertheless, I took a stab at Muttley and kind of got it pretty much approved right away. So while Jabberjaw was sort of this like crazy journey and almost never got resolved, but then got resolved at the last minute, and we all loved him to death, Grape Ape kind of happened pretty organically, but there was still some back and forth. And of course, Scooby was a huge journey. Muttley just sort of happened, because there was a lot about Muttley that kind of just worked. There were really just a couple things that you had to hit in terms of what makes Muttley Muttley. And that was like, his floppy black ears. He's got, underbite and shaggy fur, and then you're kind of there. And if you add a red scarf to that, you're pretty much done. So in terms of like signifiers and what makes characters, these kinds of little moments on the character help identify that as Muttley. And again, we were pushing toward like a more realistic approach with these characters, trying to give them actual dog-like proportions. So I had the task of trying to make sure that Muttley could walk around on 2 legs, but also maybe go down to 4 legs if he wanted to move quickly or run or something like that, and still have dog-like capabilities. So he was a bit of a challenge in terms of making sure that his, chest and the arms on him worked. And you can see that I'm really kind of pulling a lot into his chest muscles, trying to make sure that that feels proportional and not too wide, so he still feels like a dog, but he's also got a lot of like, range in terms of what he can do. So this is kind of an interesting place to be in, where I'm sort of a creature designer now. I'm not really like thinking so much about, dog anatomy and ape anatomy. I'm like, Muttley's got his own anatomy because he's sort of a weird dog man running around on 2 legs. And then, of course, all of his teeth. I really wanted him to have this like wicked smile with all these dog teeth in the back, and this, pretty crazy underbite that I exaggerated quite a bit in some of the final renditions of Muttley there, and went from there. So again, thinking about what he might look like if he were to stand on all four legs. I don't even know that there might be some cartoon footage of him doing this, but anytime I've seen Muttley, he's always been walking around on two legs. So I'm sure that someone in the chat has footage of Muttley on four legs as a cartoon. But anyway, this is where we were with Muttley pretty immediately. And we kind of stayed there for quite a bit. So in terms of like where he went, it didn't really get more advanced than this or really crazier than this. So I just mostly explored with Muttley, expressions and postures and poses and all that kind of stuff to try to capture a little bit of the character while still, again, dealing with some of those questions, like how do dog paws work in this universe? Muttley's paws are really dexterous, but they're still holding on to those dew claws and paw pads, and I'm really trying to make sure that his anatomy feels solid, but that it has room to be expressive and crazy. So it's this kind of balancing act that I was playing constantly. And, again, thinking about how he would walk around and would it feel natural and, should he, be more of a dog or should he be, more of a man and, all that kind of stuff. So again, thinking about, these two walk cycles and not just, pulling from humans, but thinking about like, what do dogs look like when they stand up? How far back can we actually splay those hips? And we'll probably push it a little bit more because it's a cartoon. And, we can animate that. But also, when he moves around like a real dog, how can we give him a strut and a walk cycle that feels good for the character, but also feels appropriate as a dog? So Muttley, again, was sort of an interesting breakdown in anatomy because he ended up being pretty wide because he just needed the room for his limbs to move around if he stood up. So he had this kind of heavier build than everyone else. He's a little tank, this guy. So this was one of the anatomy diagrams that I did for Muttley. And then he had a very complex turnaround orthographic with his anatomy diagram. So he took a lot of time, this one. And all these characters were happening, simultaneously. It wasn't like I worked on Muttley for a month and then got the next one. I was working on Muttley with Grape Ape and Jabberjaw and everybody all at once. So it was kind of switching gears all the time. But it was great because I felt like they all kind of informed each other and I got so much better at drawing. It was really like being in some sort of boot camp. So you can see that Muttley's pectoral muscles in particular are really overdeveloped. Usually with dogs and animals that walk quadrupedally, we don't really see big pectoral muscles. We really see a lot of muscle development in the tricep area and up in the trapezius because that's kind of what's, sending their locomotion into action. But Muttley needed to be able to stand up and kind of hold his arms to the side. So he has a bit of a chest there. And of course you can kind of see like naked Muttley and fur-covered Muttley. This is important when we need to model the animal in 3D. Since fur is rendered separately, and of course those of us who do this know this, but yeah, you'll typically model these things without the fur, so we had a lot of shaven Muttleys and other characters that existed on this project also. In the end, Muttley ended up looking more like himself for the film, and completely not at all what I did, which I think was the best choice. Really, I think that Scoob, in its final rendition, really benefited from actually looking like itself. And, there's still so much about this design that is informed by all the work that we did, perhaps under all that fur, but really in the end it looks just like Muttley, and I think that's why it really works. He still has that cute little silhouette, all that shaggy fur, and those like rounded bear ears. And so he looks very much like himself in the end. And so I was really happy to see him and how cute he ended up looking, because he's my favorite character and he always has been. But boy, was it a treat to be able to explore him in the way that I did, because it really felt like a ton of fun to be able to touch him in a way where I could kind of figure out like what kind of dog is he, and does he have what kind of paws does he have, and all these sorts of things. It was a really great time. So I think that's it for my talk on all those characters. I hope that it was interesting to look at some of the anatomy that I brought to each of them, and the Gosh, sorry, it just like ended and all my brain just shut down. Yeah, so I hope that that was interesting in terms of like, anatomy and approach. Again, all of these creatures are so dear to everyone, so if you're a Scooby fan, thanks for letting me play in your universe for a little bit, because it was a ton of fun to be able to work on some of these characters and bring them to life in a way that really hadn't happened yet. So we're going to take questions now. So if you've had a question, my moderator has sent me some questions, so I'm going to go through those and start to answer them. So if you do have a question, you can post it, and he might see it. We have, let's see, it looks like, well, we started a little late, so technically we've got 15 minutes, but if you need to go to another lecture, do know that this will be posted later, so if you want to post a question and then leave, and maybe it'll get answered, do that. That's totally fine, because I know that people have places to be. There's a lot to see at Lightbox Expo. Okay, number 1. Ooh, Valerian. Did you work on any creature in particular in Valerian? Great question. So in Valerian, I was asked to create whatever I wanted. That was a crazy job. It was my very first film job. It was a crazy time. And I did not expect it at all. So when I got onto Valerian, Luc Besson asked me if I would just kind of make up aliens, because he was still working on the script and still developing a lot of the story. And so he basically was just like, just take a week and do what you want. And so I did that, and it was really fun. Nothing I did was in the movie at all, but I was a big part of getting that movie optioned. So having it happen and getting the creative juices flowing, sort of that pre-production time when you're just kind of messing around and throwing ideas at the wall, was kind of the stage that I was involved in. So good question. Anyone know where I can find some really cool animal references? I'm sorry that the usernames aren't attached to these, but if you ask these questions, thank you. They're all really great. Animal references. So again, the zoo is a great place. Bring your camera or iPhone or whatever you have with you to take photos there. But there are a lot of great places online and in bookstores where you can find animal stuff. If you type in Atlas of Animal Anatomy into Google, you'll find a giant PDF full of animal anatomy that's free online. I don't know how it is. I think it's like it's an older book, so I think it's kind of like public now. But it's a collection of anatomy plates that you usually see. Like if you type in horse anatomy, you've seen this anatomy diagram. But it's all there as a PDF if you type it into Google. It is called An Atlas of Animal Anatomy is the name of the book. Check out that book. It's invaluable. Also, check out Terrell Whitlatch's work. She's fantastic and has published quite a few books about animal anatomy and imaginary creatures. So I would check out her stuff because she's an excellent resource. And then I think my last book recommendation would be The Goldfinger Animal Anatomy for the Artist. That's a really great book. Also, check it out. It's not to be missed. Number 3, how did you study and learn how to draw paws and feet that effectively out of your imagination? I drew a lot of real dog paws. So, it's sad because I don't know that I have them in this slideshow, but you can see on this Great Dane here just how, particular the paws were. And, Scooby's paws were kind of simplified and whatnot, and this rendition of him was very much after I'd learned how to draw paws. But I think that these functionality paws in terms of how they worked was after I started really looking at them. And it really just came from drawing the actual dog paw quite a bit and sort of breaking it down in a way that made sense. Again, that book, Atlas of Animal Anatomy, has a really amazing plate of both a dog paw and a cat paw and how they're put together in beautiful detail. It's fantastic. I used that constantly while I was drawing this. And then also I was looking at, even other artists' work and how they might handle anthropomorphic paws also, just to kind of understand how other artists handle it. It can be really helpful to look at how someone else might approach it. And so that was absolutely a resource that I would look at. Great question. Wow, these are awesome questions. How do you suggest one study animal anatomy to achieve a level of understanding similar to yours? These kinds of diagrams, these anatomical diagrams, try to do them often because it really helped me to understand where everything is connected. So what I did in Photoshop was I would actually just draw the Great Dane first, so I knew what the surface looked like. And then from there, I would lay in the skeleton underneath that, and then on top of that, I would lay in the musculature, and then adjust the surface level if I needed to fix it. But knowing where, you know, the flexors and tensors attached to that pelvic bone over there on that iliac crest, or knowing where the triceps pull up into the scapula, I didn't really know any of that, you know, when I first started out as an artist. It really took a lot of self-study and kind of drawing it over and over to really learn how it's all put together, and also kind of developing my own shorthand for it. So how do I get to that level? Draw it often, practice all you can, and don't stop. You'll get it wrong, and that's fine. There are so many anatomy diagrams that I've had that were incorrect, but what's kind of nice is you can always go back and correct them, and every time you do it, you'll get better. So keep going, stay the course. How long of time did I get to design Scooby? What advice could you give when designing existing characters to keep it on brand, avoiding what happened with Sonic? Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing for these characters, if we look at some of these earlier drawings of Scooby that I was working on, the reason why this kind of doesn't work as Scooby is because the silhouette doesn't really read as Scooby. Scooby has a very particular silhouette, and I think that this looks like a Great Dane that's cosplaying as Scooby, but it doesn't necessarily look like Scooby. And even in the end, you know, some of the renditions I did, if you were to put this next to like an actual Scooby drawing, it still wouldn't technically look like him completely, but there's things that are happening in this version that make it feel more like Scooby, and it really has to do with silhouette. So again, that barrel chest, those crooked ears, and that particular S-shaped tail, the big paws, all of these things, even the position of the neck and how it's kind of this like silly, you know, upright position that he's always holding his neck in, that's really important in this. You know, you can see it even here, how he's always holding his neck kind of back. And he's got these sort of really particular proportions. So I think that that's my biggest advice, is when you're redesigning a character, really consider that silhouette, because that's what's going to sell it immediately. And I think that's what ended up working with Sonic, is when he was redone somehow amazingly by that team. It was the silhouette that really shined through in the end to make him work. I hope that answers that question. What is the hardest part of keeping an animal looking like the animal when pushing your shapes to create a character that emotes, and how do you overcome this? So I think that there are certain signifiers that clue us into what an animal is and looks like. With dogs, I think when we think about a dog, if you were to, everybody right now picture a dog in their mind, you probably picture like paws, you know, toe beans, a tongue, maybe a tail that wags, right? If you were to picture a lion in your mind, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably a mane and maybe teeth and like, you know, brown tones, all these things that kind of signify what a lion is. And so I think part of that is really kind of boiling down your animal to what makes it what it is. That's kind of a weird sentence. But if you were to ask a child to draw a giraffe, they'd probably draw an animal like a round body with a long neck, horns, and, you know, spots. And that's really what makes a giraffe a giraffe. So using that in your toolkit, then you can kind of break those shapes up a bit or exaggerate them in a way that's kind of wild and crazy. So long as you get the long neck, the horns, and the spots, you're always going to sort of hint that or point to the fact that it's a giraffe. But you can kind of push some of those shapes into a more exaggerated place. And yeah, a character that emotes, that's the other thing. You know, Scooby was a bit of a challenge because in the beginning we didn't really want to give him eyebrows because we were like, well, do we have to use eyebrows? You know, it's always the eyebrows. He kind of just didn't have them in the beginning. He had like a tiny bit of eyebrows, like little bits, but we were really trying to steer away from it. But in the end, he needed them. And I think that, you know, when you're going to anthropomorphize an animal like this, where Scooby's definitely like a person, really, just in a dog body, we kind of had to add some elements of being a person there. Great question. I hope that answers that. How do you go about moving from your early realistic exploration to your stylized emotive exploration? Well, I'll have to be honest, a lot of that was working with Tony and, tapping into his expertise in terms of cartoon animation and design. He really had a great eye for proportion. But I think it is about proportion and trying to make sure that Scooby feels exaggerated in the right places. If we look back at this rendition of Scooby, he's got, a smaller head, the paws are smaller, the body is the biggest part of this character, which is kind of true to like actual dogs, right? When we look at the Great Dane proportions, he's got this more, balanced looking body. I mean, Great Danes are pretty exaggerated in the fact that they have very long legs, but everything else is pretty much in proportion. If we look at Scooby in comparison, I've kind of chosen bits about that animal to blow up. So like his nose is really big and his like muzzle is huge. He's got ginormous paws, right? They're enormous. His chest is much bigger in proportion to his body. So these kinds of like exaggeration points can be really good for talking about a certain kind of character. So Scooby is kind of a clumsy, like, like sympathetic character, so his giant paws kind of point to that, and his concerned little face all the time and sort of this like dopey look that he's got on his face with his crooked ears and all that kind of points to the fact that he's silly and sort of a clumsy fellow. So those signifiers can help explain what kind of character it is if you're going about designing creature characters. Okay, what's the next question? How much time do I get to explore the look and feel of the designs before they were handed off to 3D modeling? Every project is different. When I was on Men in Black, I turned in one concept sketch for a character, and then it was modeled. So it was a day. And then in other projects like Scoob, I got to spend 1 to 2 months on Scooby just myself. And before that, other people had been working on Scoob and Scooby and all the other characters for months before that. I think that I couldn't tell you how long Scoob's pre-production was because it kind of got delayed a few times, but it took a while. And most animations typically take a bit because you have to build everything. You don't have like live action where you can shoot a street. You have to actually build all of that stuff. So typically it takes a while, but it varies from project to project and also depends even on the director. But for this particular project, I worked on each character about an average of anywhere from 3 weeks to 2 months, somewhere in there. So, good question. For those wanting to create imagined anatomy diagram for a creature, like the one you showed of Scoob earlier, what would you recommend to keep in mind during the research and drawing process? Like I mentioned before, looking at animal anatomy really helps. So in designing or in drawing Scooby's anatomy here, all of these systems are absolutely and just actually in this Great Dane diagram here. They're all the same. I've just exaggerated them and pushed them to fit Scooby's silhouette. So if you have a creature that you're working on and you really want to make an anatomy diagram for it, I would recommend finding an animal that has similar physiology. So if you're designing something that might resemble like a bear, I would go look for some bear anatomy. There's really great stuff in Terrell Whitlatch's books, actually on bear anatomy, and use that as a guide. But again, if you're dealing with an animal that has a vertebrate, body plan or a skeleton, chances are you've got, a kneecap, and, that kneecap is going to be attached to a vastus lateralis or a quad muscle that will go up to the great trochanter of the femur and all of that. So if you can do a few anatomy studies to sort of break it down, like each big muscle group, name it, label it, just so you know what it is and where it goes, then you can just start to draw it on your own creatures and really start to kind of just copy paste, right? And sort of be like, okay, that muscle there connects from the elbow into the scapula. I'm going to make that happen on my creature too. And then just kind of go back and forth. I hope that answers that question. It's a good one. And it's kind of a big question, but really the answer is to do all the anatomy studies you can from books and diagrams, because that's going to help. Do I teach classes? I do. I teach with CDA, Concept Design Academy, here and there. I don't teach as, I'm not on like a set schedule, but I typically will teach 1 to 2 classes a year with them, and I teach creature design with CDA right now. Am I ever stressed or embarrassed when they ask for another pass? Like with Jabberjaw, all those passes would have mortified me. That's such a good question. Because yes, in the beginning I was like, oh my God, they hate it. I'm a failure. But, I think that this project and so many others before it is really good to kind of get over that fear a little bit. Because it can feel sort of personal sometimes when someone's like, no, you got to take another pass at this. This doesn't look right. Or even if, I think one of the other things that happens is sometimes they'll be like, okay, thank you. And they'll hand it to another artist. And you're like, oh man, I didn't do it right. Damn it. But sometimes it can be for a number of different reasons. Maybe, it just wasn't what was working out. Maybe they also feel like you don't have the time to handle it. And so they need another artist to help you out. And most of the time it's really just because it's just the wrong pass and you got to do it again. And I think at this point in my career, I've gotten to a level where I'm like a little more interested in that challenge of like, no, that's fine. I can find the character. It'll be okay. Just let me have another pass and I'll get it. And just kind of being relentless about it can help with some of that anxiety, because you're never going to get it right out of the ballpark. It's been pretty rare that I have. And in those instances that I have, it's fine. But there's really nothing like struggling with a character for months and then finally you get it and it's like, yes, I did it. And, I had a bit of a roadmap for these characters because we were redesigning characters. So I had a target. But with characters you're designing for a new franchise or an original franchise, that can be very difficult. So it can be stressful and embarrassing, absolutely. And I think that everybody deals with that to some level. And it's okay because we all just want to do a really good job. And I think that but even if that job felt like you didn't get it right, that's okay, because you still did a good job because you explored it. And that's the biggest part about character design, is making sure that you explore options because you've explored it. And so you've made the job easier for the next person or the next round that you're doing. So in the end, it all helps. Let's see here. Oh, cool. We got usernames. Weena Lee asks, do you do any live paint streams on Instagram or YouTube? I would love to learn more. I do now. So Lightbox has definitely taught me to learn software on the fly, because I've never done a YouTube live stream before. But yeah, so last night I actually live streamed on Instagram. I did a gouache painting demo. You can check that out on my Instagram TV tab on my profile. My Instagram is just under my name. You can find that there. And I'll be streaming on Instagram quite a bit because I just had such an awesome time. It was so great to hang out with #CreatureFriends. If any of you were there at that stream, that was great. And I'll be doing that again tonight. So Weena, I hope that you join us for the Instagram stream tonight. I'll be doodling in Procreate. And I hope to do some more YouTube stuff. I have a few YouTube tutorials in terms of like how I draw and paint digitally on YouTube right now. But I'll be posting more in the future. And then of course, my Patreon, I actually share more videos on that, more about process, more learning, that kind of thing. And you can access those for $5 a month. Great question. Thanks. Oscar Trejo. Hi, any advice? Oscar Trejo asks, sorry. Hi, any advice to make a portfolio for creature design to stand out? Good question. Really, I think that some of the best things that I did early on in my career was I did a few things. I did some fan art, because I think that fan art has a really good hook and grab kind of thing where you can sort of pull people in and be like, oh, I know that Battle Cat. Like I think I drew Battle Cat, and that got me noticed by a lot of people because people were reblogging it and like, oh, sweet, it's Battle Cat, but like, cool. And then people actually noticed me. So that's a good way to get noticed. And then I think from there, and it's great practice and it's a ton of fun also. I'll just add that because it's a fan art's super fun. But the another thing that you can do too to add to that creature portfolio is, coming up with original designs and descriptions and really kind of show how things work. It's one thing to sort of draw like a cool looking creature, but it's another thing to sort of explain and break it apart and, show the inside of the mouth and maybe describe a little bit about its habitat or maybe some of the adaptations that it has and that sort of thing. So a little bit of world building is always a good thing with creature work, and showing a range, showing a range between like humanoid creatures and animal creatures and even real animals, showing that you have a grasp on actual animal anatomy is really helpful. Great question, Oscar. Thank you. And Sarah Donalinger, hi. Hey, Sarah, asks, for art like this, do you find those gigs never make it to the studio's job boards? And that it's all word of mouth. Yeah, so, it's hard because I think a lot of the jobs that I've gotten have been through referrals or recommendations or kind of randomly. So someone might have seen my work on something, like Tony did. Tony found it online and hired me for this project. And that kind of like never happens, but that happened to me with Scooby and with Valerian. Because I had stuff online that someone just happened to see. Other times or actually pretty much all the other times, I've been recommended or referred or have worked with someone that then went to work on something else. So it's, especially in like film, I suppose, animation and games is a little different because they typically keep people for longer. And I typically work in live action, so that's kind of a jump around contract gig situation where I'll work on a movie for like a week or 3 months or maybe 9 months and then it's done. Whereas I feel like if you're going to work in a game studio or in an animation studio, you'll probably be hired on as a contractor or maybe full-time, depending on what it is, especially for like TV and stuff like that. So you can find jobs through the job boards there. But it's at least in my experience, if I'm being completely honest, for me, it's been recommendation and stuff and like, just being referred by people, which I think is why events like this and, being online and, reaching out to people is so important, and just kind of having a relationship with people, like a genuine relationship with people, because they can then recommend your work and, go and help you out if they need to. So it's one of those kind of weird things where like, and again, like even in my own career, I've absolutely recommended people all the time. It's one thing to recommend people. I feel like on a few of the past projects I've been on, I've presented like a whole thing and been like, here's the people, and then like nobody I recommend gets hired. So it's hard to do, and it's everybody has like their person that they've worked with before, so it can be a little bit hard to break into. But don't let it stop you, because it can be discouraging. But there are definitely times and moments when being available and friends, or being online, or even just submitting your portfolio where you see that there might be a portfolio submission slot, just do it. Take every chance you can. And that goes for everybody. Like, take every chance you can, because it never hurts to be in every place at every time, because it might be the right place in the right time. I hope that helps and is encouraging, because I know that it can feel a little bit like aimless and discouraging sometimes to be like, how do I even get into this? But really it's about staying the course and making sure that you are kind of everywhere all the time. So I hope that's a good answer. And let's see here. I think we'll take this as our last question. Amberwing Art asks, any chance you'll create a course for Schoolism or New Masters Academy? I've actually talked a little bit with Bobby about Schoolism, so that might be in the works at some point. Not sure what that will be yet, but we're probably something creature related, but we're working that out. And New Masters Academy, I'm always down to create, courses and curriculums for different teaching institutions. Absolutely. If they'd have me, I'd do it. Right now, in case like you're the person in charge of that, I'm probably not going to teach until next year, just because I have some things I need to do this fall and this winter that require a lot of attention. So I'll probably be teaching more in the spring of 2021. So, but yeah, I'd be down to do that. I'm also interested in doing some like mentorships at some point, like just some kind of one-on-ones with people. So I do critique sessions in my Discord through my Patreon right now. So that's a pretty cool thing. Actually, I've worked with, I think a couple people in the chat might be here from there. And the work that they've posted has just been super great. And it's really fun to work with everybody on that. So I want to, kind of pour myself more into that because that's really where I have a lot of fun. Anyway, I hope that answers all the questions. You all have been amazing. Thank you so much for great questions. I hope that this was fun and interesting and exciting and a good look at some beloved Hanna-Barbera characters. Enjoy the rest of your Lightbox weekend. I know that I'm excited about everything. Again, I'll be live streaming tonight on Instagram at 8 p.m. I'm going to be doing some Procreate doodling, so if you're on Instagram, I'd love it if you join me and say hi and tell me you were in this talk. That'd be great. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. I hope that you all have a great day and weekend, and thank you again so much. Have a good one. All right, bye.